What up, everybody? I'm Brett Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is the Coach Approach.
Stay on.
Coach, how you doing, brother? Looks like
What's
you're
going on, man?
looks like you're back in your second home, and that is a California hotel. Where are you at this week?
I am in Ontario, California, seeing customers this week. So I didn't even have time to get out of my work clothes. Normally, by the time we get on, I've got a hat on, I've got a hoodie on or something, and I've got my
All right.
bourbon poured, and I'm having to settle for work clothes and a monster tonight. So we'll make it work.
Well, you look like just like I just got off the golf course. You got a Nike golf shirt on, so I like your work attire. It's always nice when you can wear a golf polo to work every day.
Hey, golf clubs are always in the trunk, just in case someone wants to go play golf, or I'm
There
bored
you
and I want to go to a driving range. So you always got to have those
Well,
with
I
you.
put in 6 holes today, so it's always nice to get out there. But let's get right into this, man. I'll tell you what, I absolutely, this is probably my favorite time of the year. And I feel like this year, more so than many others, I've been hibernating a little bit longer than, or taking a break from fantasy football a little bit longer than I normally do. But I'm ready to get back into it because we're less than 3 weeks away from draft night, and it's time to really get into the rookies. And I'm looking forward to seeing who your top 5 quarterbacks and kind of sharing different perspectives on each guy with each other. But before we do that, let's just get into some of the news.
Yeah.
Usually this time we've got trades and signings to talk about, and there haven't been a lot. It's kind of slowing down. I think teams are more focused on who they're going to be drafting in the next couple weeks. But there was a big signing today, and that was Derek Carr re-signing or signing an extension. I think it's 3 years, $120 million.
Yeah.
And he could stay with the Raiders. I work with a very strong, deep-rooted Raider fan, and he's one of these guys that's not very happy that he's going to be around much longer. What are your thoughts on Derek re-signing or extending his contract for 3 more years?
You know, it's an interesting question because I remember when the Cowboys were in the situation with Dak Prescott, and you had people, even Cowboy fans, with everything that Dak has done with the franchise, everybody was like, Dak's not worth $40 million. You don't pay the guy quarterback that. It's like, look, the market always changes. $40 million now, and you see what Patrick Mahomes signed for, and you see what Aaron Rodgers is doing. It's like cap space, like a fictitious number sometimes. I mean, these guys, people that are good at maneuvering the cap space, have never had an issue with where they're at cap wise. They always find a way to sign the guys they want. And I love, first of all, I love having Devontae Adams, his old Fresno State teammate, comes over to, what they've done with their defensive line, with Max Crosby and what they're doing there. And I love it. I've always been a Derek Carr guy. I feel like he kind of gets some of that Kirk Cousins treatment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I love it for Derek Carr. I think it's great to see the Raiders push all in and say, hey, we've brought people in on the defensive side of the ball. We've brought people in on the offensive side of the ball. You have Hunter Renfrow. You have Devontae Adams. You have Darren Waller. You have Josh Jacobs. Like, we're going to keep this team and keep this nucleus intact, and that we've got a 2 to 3 year window. We think we can really try to do it. And look, if you're in the AFC West, you better be doing something because that's the most competitive, division in football now. And so I think the Raiders are saying, hey, we see what everybody else is doing, and we're going to push the chips all in, and we're going to make a run at it. I love the signing, and I get his frustration, but I think there's a lot of Raider fans that weren't sure he was a guy that could take him to the next level. But I think if you really understand the game of football, and I always kind of talk about keeping your eyes off the ball, is look at pre-snap what defense is doing, look at post-snap what you see. Derek Carr is extremely intelligent with a high football IQ, and I think you added Devontae Adams in that offense, it changes things a little bit. So good for him. I mean, look, it's $40 million. You could say it's below market value right now, so you could argue they got a deal.
I'm not sure how any Raider fan would not have seen this coming.
Yeah.
after they brought in his quote best friend in Adams. I mean, you don't make that move and then move off of Carr right after making that move. So to me, it was a no-brainer. And you got a new coach out there, so hopefully things will get better for Derek, because obviously, if you look at what the Raiders had to go through last year, that was rough, and that guy still did a hell of a job in that team. So, like you said, kudos to him. Unfortunately, one other news came out the weekend, and it's not something you want to talk about. But Dwayne Haskins died when he was struck by a car or by a dump truck, whatever it was. The reality of it is that he's no longer here, and you're talking about a kid that was just 24 years old, and whose Pittsburgh teammates and whose Pittsburgh coaches just raved about what a great kid he was, and that ever since he's been there, he's been nothing but a professional. So, man, rip Dwayne, and I can't. My heart breaks for his family.
Yeah, no, hey, I echo everything, and I think this is a time where you really focus on, the person and not the football player. It's devastating as a family, to lose somebody, a friend, a colleague, someone you shared locker room time with, that what he meant to Ohio State University and the 1 year of success he had there, and what happened there, and making a run. So it's very unfortunate. Forget the football stuff and what the potential in the future for him could have been. He was a great guy in the locker room. If you listen to guys that have played with him, you listen to coaches, he was right. He was a guy that understood. He went down there to work with Mitchell Trubisky and some of the other guys in the Steelers organization to get better. And as a way to teach Mitch, like, hey, you're new, and I have an understanding of what the offense is and what we're doing. Let me help you out. And that's a great thing when two quarterbacks are competing for an opportunity or sharing that with each other. And but yeah, thoughts and prayers for sure go out to the family, friends, and everybody involved in that tragedy.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, we better move on, or we're going to move on to your consensus rankings. Another week has gone by. You've compiled them again. We're going to get into a little fun little game, and not a game, but just kind of who would you rather have. And one of the reasons why a lot of the picks that I made, and we picked a spot for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. And I kind of just looked at what, I kind of read the room on Twitter and what a lot of people like to debate over as far as this guy or that guy. And with that being said, any changes that you saw? I know we didn't talk about this prior, but anything kind of open your eyes to anything that came out with this week's rankings?
No, I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot. I mean, what you're seeing is you're seeing more analysts and sites putting rookies into their overall rankings. And so you're starting to see a little bit more of that, which is fun and exciting up until the draft. But as far as actual players and veterans in terms of movement, there wasn't really a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of action that we saw over over the last week. It was more, there was a few analysts that hadn't quite updated, their rankings over the last, 2 or 3 weeks. So going back, and you're starting to see your Deshaun Watson movement coming up, or some still hadn't really moved him up or down their board. You're starting to see Deshaun Watson get a lot more play there. You started seeing Tom Brady coming out of retirement. You're starting to see a lot of guys that had him ranked still in their rankings around QB 35 to 40 with the hopes he would come back. And now that he's officially back, you're seeing him jump into, up into the top 30, top 25, even in Dynasty. Guys just feel like, hey, I'll take a 1 year run at it. So there's been some movement for sure, but not a ton, not anything that really flipped position, so to speak.
Well, let's just go ahead and get into this then. So when we talk about quarterbacks, you're looking at guys that, not everyone's going to be able to get a top 5 guy. And then now, especially in Superflex, if you can get guys that are middle of the road, or guys that might be ranked in the 14 to 18 range for a quarterback, for your second quarterback, I think you're happy most times. And a guy that I had, or 2 guys that I had a lot in that spot, were the mentioned guy that we talked about earlier, Derek Carr, and Kirk Cousins. And there's a lot of people, and we talked about the Raider fan who's not happy with Derek Carr, and you mentioned how a lot of Minnesota fans feel the same way about Kirk Cousins. What does the consensus rankings, where do they have them, and who do they typically have higher when it comes to those two?
So it's interesting. There's 5 quarterbacks to me that kind of fit in that tier. Okay, you've got Mac Jones, Derek Carr, Zach Wilson, Kirk Cousins, and Ryan Tannehill. Now, you could make an argument. Mac Jones, a lot of the agists out there that are really big on age and situations, Mac Jones is actually ranked 17th versus Derek Carr 18, and Zach Wilson 19, Kirk Cousins at 20. So, consensus has those fives grouped very, very close, going at an average ADP of anywhere between 46.5 to 48.5. So they're all kind of grouped together, which is going to be, right around that fourth round, but in a 12-team league. But I think with again, we talked about Derek Carr a little bit earlier, but I think Derek Carr, to me, if I'm having to pick between the two, the value is the same, the ADP is the same, all things being equal. I'm taking Derek Carr again because of Devontae Adams and Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller, and you've got Josh Jacobs, and I just feel like what they've done on the defensive side of the ball. You're in a division, you're going to have to score points to win. I just like the idea of what the Raiders have done and what they've built around Derek Carr. That if I'm choosing those two guys, I'm taking Derek Carr. And we've seen him move up. Now, you talked earlier about moves. There wasn't a lot of movement between last week and now. But if you look at since Devontae Adams has signed with the Las Vegas Raiders, you have seen Derek Carr move up. Nothing's really changed for Kirk Cousins. You still have Dalvin Cook, and we expect KJ Osborne to step up again, this season based on how we finished last year and what they have in Justin Jefferson. And even though Adam Thielen is getting up there in terms of the age, right? I still think there's a 1 to 2 year window that Adam Thielen is still relevant. He's always going to be a red zone target, but I'm certainly leaning Derek Carr of those two for sure. What's interesting is there's only a difference of 11 points total. So I've got 25 analysts that help put this together, and they're only separated, Derek Carr and Kirk Cousins, by 11 total points. So, for example, if you rank Derek Carr as your QB 22, that's 22 points. If he's your QB 1, you get 1 point, and then you total it all up. All 25 analysts have voted, have ranked those two guys. Whereas you get further down in the rankings, QB, 45. A lot of rankings only go up to QB 30, 35, or 40. So if you're outside that top 40, those guys, in some cases, don't have a ranking. So these guys have been ranked by all 25, and they're only within 11 points of each other. So there's a lot of back and forth between who they prefer. But I just think that Devontae Adams' addition in Las Vegas and what they've done defensively, the division they play on, you're going to have to score points to win in that division. I would certainly lean Derek Carr.
You know what? I always look at it, if I'm sitting on the clock and if I got two names staring at me and those are the two names, what does my gut tell me? And my gut is usually based off, once we get into a draft, it's based off of, my eyes and research over the last however many months. And for me, it would be Derek Carr as well. So we're going to move on to the running backs. And this one, probably they're not as close, but I've seen a lot of people really high on Tony Pollard this year and over the last couple of years. And then obviously A.J. Dillon. So of those two, where are we talking about them as they compare in rankings? And what do you like or don't like about either one of them as it comes to Dynasty?
Well, I think what's interesting is if we talked about redraft versus Dynasty, a lot of people, you would say, hey, Aaron Jones is re-signed in Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers is back. I still think Aaron Jones is going to take on some more of that pass catching that was vacated targets with Devontae Adams being gone. And we'll wait and see what Green Bay does in the draft with wide receivers. But I think it's interesting to see that A.J. Dillon, for a lot of these analysts, is actually getting ranked higher than Aaron Jones, where I'm still a firm believer that Aaron Jones is the better of the two, and I'll certainly ride that due to pass catching ability. Now, that's very few. There's only two analysts that rank A.J. Dillon above Aaron Jones, but it's worth noting. A.J. Dillon comes in as an ADP at 86.5, where Tony Pollard comes in at 120.25. So you're talking about, significantly, you're talking about 34 picks later, as an example. I'm a huge Tony Pollard guy. I was a big advocate for Zeke Elliott coming this year as a Cowboys fan. I felt like he came in great shape last year. Obviously, he battled the PCL injury for most of the year, and Dallas just refused to rest him. But Tony Pollard, if you look at each year of his career, he's getting more touches on a per game basis. He's getting more touches in critical situations. He brings that burst, that offense. But there's the downside is he struggles in pass pro. So it hurts him on third down situations that are not obvious passing down situations. So from a dynasty perspective, I certainly would take A.J. Dillon over Tony Pollard right now, based on what we know right now. Dallas is stuck with Zeke for another year or two. If that situation changes, I'd be all over Tony Pollard over A.J. Dillon. But based on current roster structure, the ages are not too far off. And based on the offenses that they're both in, I would lean A.J. Dillon right now just because of, again, Tony Pollard's got Zeke Elliott. And as long as Zeke Elliott's getting paid, he's going to get volume.
Right. And I get that. But if you look at the two, who's running back that's ahead of them seems to have, everyone always talks about follow the money. If Aaron Jones
Yeah.
just signed a new deal and we're looking at the last couple years of a deal, wouldn't that kind of make Tony a little more? I mean, it's easier to walk away from Elliott sooner than it is to walk away from Aaron Jones.
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, hey, Tony Pollard, I mean, his high ranking is 38, 36, high 30s. He doesn't have anybody that ranks him in the outside of the top 38. He has very few votes in the low 20s. But if you look at AJ Dillon, he's got a couple, 19, 18, RB 19, RB 18, RB 21, 22. So he's getting more of the love. And again, age, offense he's in, people assume. I'm like you, I get it. Aaron Jones didn't just sign for 1 year. He's going to be there for a couple of years. And with Aaron Rodgers back, which I think is how we all felt that was going to play out. I didn't see Aaron Rodgers going anywhere, so I'm not surprised. So I think I love Tony Pollard's talent. I love the usage. But again, just because of Zeke Elliott and, her inability to play Tony Pollard in short yardage and goal line situations is a little bit frustrating.
I get it. I tell you what I like about the group of people that we picked, these are not top dynasty guys. These are guys that you've got to fill a roster with. And I like these debates because these are typically the type of decisions you're going to have to make in the 8th, or I know in the 8th round last year, or when I was in the Scott Fishbowl draft last year and I took a quarterback round 1, and now I'm sitting here in round 6 or 7 after grabbing a couple backs or grabbing a bunch of receivers and a tight end. I was sitting there and I was happy to get Derek Carr in round 8.
Yeah.
So it's always about value, and it's always about where you're having or what capital you're having to use to get them. For me, and these are great debates to look at because sometimes you're faced exactly with these type of decisions. Another one, Twitter is all about this one. And these are two guys that definitely are going to benefit with the arrival of Russell Wilson. If you're sitting there on the clock, you taking Jerry Jeudy or are you taking Cortland Sutton? And then secondly, what is the consensus ranking saying about those two?
So in consensus rankings, Jerry Jeudy comes in at wide receiver 21 and Cortland Sutton comes in at wide receiver 32. You have seen some movement since Russell Wilson got signed in Denver. Cortland Sutton started to narrow that gap a little bit. And there's a lot of guys like you and I, we've talked about this. I'm a big Cortland Sutton guy. I felt like he was the better option going into last season had they stuck with Drew Lock, because Drew Lock is a gunslinger that likes to take shots. Teddy Bridgewater at the time had never thrown more than 15 touchdowns in a single season. He's more of a dink and dunk guy, high completion percentage, man. And I felt like that was a better fit for Jerry Jeudy. Now you're going back into Russell Wilson, who throws one of the best deep balls in the NFL. He's a guy that can extend plays. I think Cortland Sutton, to me, is the better of the two, and I'll take Cortland Sutton. Now, the average ADP for Jerry Jeudy is 80.5 and Cortland Sutton is at 94.5. I'll sit back, and if I can wait around and I can get Cortland Sutton, I'll take that value all day long over taking Jerry Jeudy 14 picks earlier. So to me, it's a no-brainer because again, I look at what they do in the red zone, right? If you're inside the 10-yard line, I want Cortland Sutton over Jerry Jeudy in that situation. I want Cortland Sutton. In terms of a possession receiver that can also stretch the field. I get Jerry Jeudy's got the top end speed, but I feel like Cortland Sutton brings more to what Russell Wilson wants to do, throwing outside the numbers and those things. So I'm a Cortland Sutton guy.
It's close for me, but what I really do like is that I have both these guys on a heck of a lot of rosters. And it's nice to look at your roster and see them there and go, and just smile knowing that you got Russell Wilson throwing some this year. Let's move on to a couple tight ends. And this was Mike Gesicki versus Noah Fant. And when I looked at the rankings, I was a little surprised to see where they stood out. Now, granted, they're close to each other, but I kind of leaned a different way than what your consensus guys had.
Yeah, so you're even with Noah Fant going to and being a part of the trade for Russell Wilson. Excuse me, going with Drew Lock to Seattle. It's like, hey, we're trading you to Seattle. Oh, that's awesome, but we're also trading Drew Lock, right? It was almost like, okay, I get it. For me, I have seen people rank and having insight into the thought process of some of the analysts and the rankers that I'm pulling this information from. Some of it was, hey, Tyreek Hill is going to eat, Jalen Waddle's going to eat. Look at the targets that they both had. Last year with Jalen Waddle as a rookie, I think far surpassed a lot of the hype that he got even pre-draft. But now you bring a Mike Gesicki, and I compare it to the Dallas Cowboys. But last year you had CeeDee Lamb and you had Amari Cooper and Dalton Schultz, right? Dalton Schultz got an opportunity to play because of the Blake Jarwin injury the year before, and everybody kind of felt like Dalton Schultz, is not really going to eat in that offense. He's not great with yards after the catch. He's not great extending the field vertically from the tight end position. And you saw Dalton Schultz eat, because what do teams do? I'm going to shut down your first and second option in the passing game, and I'm going to if we're going to let Dalton Schultz catch the ball and try to get some wiggle, great. I think that's what you see with Mike Gesicki, but he's a more athletic Dalton Schultz. Tyreek Hill taking the top off. Jalen Waddle can take the top off. Mike Gesicki's going to have all that room to work in the middle of the field, and I don't trust Drew Lock in Seattle with Noah Fant. And Noah Fant has done nothing to make me feel like he's a better player in a bad quarterback situation with a team historically that likes to run the football. You have Chris Carson, Rashad Penny coming back. I'll take Mike Gesicki. Now, what's interesting is their value is almost identical, because Noah Fant's at tight end 10. He was in the top 7. He's dropped a little bit since the trade. Mike Gesicki is at 11. We haven't really seen him drop, even with the addition of Tyreek Hill. He's kind of held firm where he's at. There's still guys that put him in the top 7. There's very few that have him outside the top 15. There's only one analyst that has Mike Gesicki outside the top 15. Whereas with Noah Fant, there are 2 or 3 that have him outside the top 15. So it's a very, very close.
I think I might be a little bit biased, and this is partly why I have come to the conclusion that I'd rather have Gesicki. And that's because I feel like, as a Fant roster manager who invested pretty good capital to get him, I've expected or had hoped to get more from him. And getting Gesicki cost me not nearly as much as Fant, and getting the production from him has always been more than Fant. So I lean Gesicki in that one. So let's do it. This is the time. I know you put a lot of work into it. I'm excited about talking about your top 5 quarterbacks. And there's always, when you look at a draft and you look at mock drafts, typically you see the very top heavy teams the teams at the top of drafts reaching for quarterbacks or taking quarterbacks. This appears to be a draft where you may not have more than one quarterback taken in the first 10 picks. You certainly doesn't look like you're going to have the type of year that we had last year with 5 quarterbacks going in the 2021 class. Which quarterback off the top of your head do you think is most ready to play from day one?
It's such a great question. And what's nice is I listen to a lot of podcasts. I do a lot of research, and obviously I do my own film study, but I also have a film chat room on Twitter with some of the greatest, what I think film guys in the industry. And I get to see the conversations they have back and forth, and to be involved in those conversations and share your perspective in comparison to what they're seeing. Some of these guys are scouts at the NFL level and have all the things they need, the lanyards, whatever you call it, credentials to get into the NFL, deal. So it's been neat to have those conversations and see where we align. I think the most NFL ready guy, if I'm a GM right now and I'm like, hey, these are my options, I'm definitely in need of a quarterback. Who is the most NFL ready guy? It is crazy to me how different a lot of us think. Like, there's no clear cut. You can say, hey, who's got the highest ceiling from a fantasy perspective? Well, obviously Malik Willis does. If we're talking about fantasy perspective, if we're talking about real football, I love what Desmond Ridder brings to the table. So I have him actually ranked above Malik Willis personally, strictly from an NFL, who is, I think, the most NFL ready right now. But you can make an argument for any one of these guys, because that class is not. There's not the Justin Fields. There's not, the quarterbacks you had last year that were coming out, the Trevor Lawrences, the Zach Wilsons. Now you could say there's some athletes that are better than what you see with Mac Jones. So I can see where Mac Jones, you can make an argument. There's maybe 2 or 3 quarterbacks in this draft class that might take over Mac Jones just based off athletic profile. But if you look at last year's class, I wouldn't take any of these guys over the top 4 guys in that class last year, just based off of what we've seen on film, what the scouts are saying, what guys that are in the know are saying, and what you read. But if I had to pick one, I would say I would take Desmond Ridder.
Desmond Ridder. You know what when you watch Cincinnati play, and you know they're no longer they no longer could be considered a minor program with what that's been going on over there the
Yeah.
last 6 or 7 years, and he just always seemed to be composed. He always seemed ready to just kind of lead the team, and I agree. I think, and I don't want to take the easy way out. But I see a lot of Russell Wilson and his
Yeah.
leadership qualities, and I see him being the type of playmaker that can do things and yet do things with his legs and still stand there in the pocket when it's needed. One question before we move on, because this was a big deal with the Trey Lance situation last year. Now, Trey
Yeah.
Lance kind of came into a situation where they already had an established quarterback, but that quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, has had injury history in the past, and they made a huge move to move up and get him, and then they sat him the whole year. And as an old school guy that I am, and I'm sure you got to consider yourself an old school guy, I
Yeah.
like. I don't think that there's anything wrong in having a rookie sit behind an established vet or somebody who. And if you're a real bad team and you stick a rookie out there, like happens so often with Cleveland back in the day, it's tough for some of them to overcome that. And I don't have a problem with guys sitting. What about you? Do you think it's better that they gain the experience and get out there right away, or kind of learn the ropes a little bit at practice and kind of hold the clipboard?
Well, and I think it depends on situation, right? We talk about landing spots, and that's not necessarily what I'm saying. To me, is when you go and you see it a lot of times on NFL Network, you'll see like John Gruden when he would go pre-draft before he got into coaching again, and he would do chalk talk, or you would see Steve Mariucci do it, and he would draw up a play, and within 5 minutes, that now he'd erase the board, and then those guys had to go up and redraw it and walk through the progression with him. Me, it's really more about the 6 inches between the ears. How good is this guy at processing information? How good is he understanding pre-snap that look the defense is giving, but also going to recognize post-snap what adjustments have been made to try to throw you off? Can he use his eyes to move a safety? Can he use his feet, shoulders to move a corner? And when you look at that stuff on tape, I think that's what's really important. So it depends on, again, what is the mental makeup of this player and where am I at as an organization? Do I have a really bad offensive line? I'm going to get this kid murdered in the first year. Or do I feel like I can stack up and he can actually learn and move forward? That to me is really what it comes down to. So I don't think there's a cookie cutter that says, hey, you've got to sit
Right.
Trey Lance, you have Jimmy G, and it's a Mike Shanahan offense, and they're a Kyle Shanahan offense, and they're built to win now. I think that's different. I think that's a great landing spot for Trey Lance. And we'll get into that a little bit later. There are some landing spots for some of these quarterbacks that can put them in that situation. They don't have to be the guy right away. But if you take a Malik Willis, and there's talk about if Detroit could take Malik Willis at number 2, he doesn't have to play right away. But at the same time, that's not a team that's in win now mode, right?
Right.
Could they potentially battle for a playoff spot? Yeah, they're not going to make a deep run. They're not ready yet. They're a few pieces away. But that's a situation where if he picks up information quickly, does he start day one, game one? No, I wouldn't do that. But could he start by game 4 or 5? Yeah. So I think it just depends on where these landing spots are and how quickly that kid picks up information.
Yeah, but I think the most important thing you said, there is no cookie cutter thing, because you can look at guys like, you can look at Russell Wilson, you can look at, in statistics fantasy, you can look at Mac Jones and say he's not great for fantasy, but he was great for the New England Patriots as far as coming right out of school and leading that team. So yeah, it's definitely a situation that needs to be made per every different situation that there is.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's get into your top 5 quarterbacks. I really been waiting for this all day long, and let's just go right into it. Who is your 5th ranked quarterback coming into this draft?
So here's what's tough, and I think with the coach approach is we talk about real football versus fantasy football, and part of what we do is try to bring real football into fantasy football and how that helps you make decisions on Sunday in terms of who you want to bring in, and there's fancy terms that are thrown out, there's advanced metrics that are thrown out, and we try to keep it as simple as possible, and also be able to talk about people that are just starting out in fantasy. But Sam Howell to me is that number 5 guy, and I actually have him. We talk about potential landing spots. Let's talk about real quick, because then we can share this with the rest of the quarterbacks. But if you look at teams to me that are looking for quarterbacks, you've got Detroit potentially at number 2. You've got Carolina at number 6. You have Atlanta at number 8, Seattle at number 9, New Orleans at picking 18th, Pittsburgh 20, Indianapolis at 42. We'll talk about that a little bit later, why I've included them. And then we have Washington at number 47. Sam Howell, to me, I would not be surprised if he slides into that second round. I've got him right now going to Washington at pick 47. I think at pick 11, you're going to see them take a Drake London or potentially a wide receiver to match up with Terry McLaurin. That I just see Sam Howell as a guy. When you saw Javonte Williams and Michael Carter and De'Ami Brown, I can't remember the fourth guy off the top of my head, and he lost that talent he had in year 1 and 2 as a starter in North Carolina, and he had to play last year without those elite players. He struggled, and they had to use him more in the run game. He is not a rushing quarterback, but he's savvy enough, he's physical enough, he's smart enough to understand what to do and how to protect the football. The guy ran for almost 800 yards after the first year, completely irrelevant in the run game.
Right, but it's funny you say that, but his athlete, he was very canny in the way he did it.
Yeah.
He made a rule change in the in NCAA football when he did the old fake slide, continue to run to lead the team down the field. So
No, that was Kenny Pickett, wasn't it?
oh, you're right.
That was Kenny Pickett. Yeah.
That's little.
No,
But I mean, still, Sam Howell, I don't think you're giving him as much credit with what he does with his legs. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of guys that aren't typical running guys. However, if they can extend the play and if they can, make a guy miss and then get through a lane, he's got the ability to do that if needed.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference, right, between a guy that we talk about mobile quarterbacks. There's a guy that you run, you're not going to take Sam Howell and run designed quarterback plays between the tackles. You're not going to run a power read. You're not going to run, I don't want to get too much into that stuff that people don't understand it, but you're not going to run tray counter. You're not going to run some of the stuff with him that you would run with, a Kyler Murray or a Malik Willis or even a Cam Newton or a Mitchell Trubisky, even guys that can run zone read and they can do it well. Sam Howell's not that guy. He's a guy that will create when things break down, and at the college level, because they didn't have the skill set around him, they did have to rely on that a little bit. And there were some design. You're not going to do that in the NFL with Sam Howell. You're just not going to do it. He's a 4.8 guy. A 5.57 guy, if you want to be specific to when he ran at the combine. But I think at one point he was timed unofficially to 4.8 something. But he's not a guy you're going to design run plays around. Now, there's a lot of things that work in his favor. He's 19 years old as a breakout age. He's a 6'1", 218-pound guy. He's not a guy that's not athletic. And if you look at his strengths, he can make throws at all three levels, and he can make those throws with accuracy. He stands out as a leader. He's a guy that teammates rally around. He's tough to sack because he understands pocket awareness and how to manipulate the pocket to create more time. But he doesn't lose accuracy, I guess what I'm saying, when he goes off script. He gets outside the pocket. But he also has a little bit of a gunslinger mentality. And I think if he's not in the right situation and he's playing a team that can't protect very well, I think you're going to see some struggles there. I think he's a guy that can sit behind Carson Wentz for a year. If Carson Wentz figures it out, maybe it's 2 years. But I think that Carson Wentz is on a rental in Washington, and I think they have the ability to go, hey, let's help the team at number 11, put something else around Carson Wentz. Then we may take a Sam Howell, or the Colts could take him because Matt Ryan is aging at pick 42. Those are the landing spots I think make the most sense for Sam Howell.
The thing that I would just add about Sam Howell before we go over to number 4 is that he has dropped, because I remember last year at this time, he was a lot of people's number 1. And him and Desmond Ridder, all those guys right there. But Sam Howell, I saw a lot of people touting him touting him as the number 1 quarterback in this class.
Hey, look, he was a 4-star guy. That's a big time recruit. He was in the top 100 overall recruit. Originally had committed to Florida State before Mac Brown was like, hey, we're keeping you in North Carolina. From North Carolina, it was obviously fun. You could go through all the statistics. You could put up the passing numbers, threw for over 10,000 yards, 64% completion percentage, 92 touchdowns, only 23 interceptions. But if you look at each year, that touchdown to interception ratio went down. In year 1, it was 38-7. Year 2, 30-7. And then when the talent left, you needed to put it more on his shoulders. As a passer, he did not deliver. He was at 24-9 touchdown ratio. His touchdown rate went down all 3 years. Interception rate went up for 3 consecutive years. I just didn't see it. The more we saw of him and the more I watched the film to validate what we read, I don't see Sam Howell as a guy that is going to be ready to go in the first year. He's got to sit behind somebody. I think he falls the second round.
All right, let's move on to your number 4. And I mistakenly gave Sam Howell the credit, but the guy we're talking about is your Kenny Pickett. So why don't you tell us what you like about Kenny Pickett? And he is a guy that's kind of moved up over this last season. So tell me what you know.
Yeah. So Kenny Pickett, a 5-year guy. He did play 4 games his freshman year in 2017, so we were able to count that as a redshirt game. I think the 4 game was the limit. So he was able to actually get 5 years of playing time. I loved his progression throughout his career. He didn't put up great numbers his first 4 years. I mean, he's a 4-year, you can really say 3-year starter, full-time starter. His numbers were not impressive as a sophomore, junior, or even as a senior. Now his redshirt, his 5th year, he put it all together. You know, you've seen a lot of quarterbacks like Joe Burrow and Mac Jones and other quarterbacks that have put it together in their last year, and that's transferred into the NFL. So I think Kenny Pickett has that opportunity. He's a little bit more athletic than I think people realize. He's a 4.7 guy at the quarterback position. His short shuttle was decent, 33.5-inch vertical, 10-foot broad jump. The guy is athletic. But I was really impressed with how he put it all together, last season and took Pittsburgh. They had a great season last year, and he was underwhelming during his first 4 years. But if you look at his touchdown to interception ratio, was only a 1.56, 39 touchdowns to 25 interceptions in his first 4 years. Then you saw him come back, break Dan Marino's record, which is a big deal. He's a Heisman finalist and throws for over 4,300 yards and 42 touchdowns to only 7 interceptions in that year. I think it's a guy that the light bulb, it flipped on. He's great at processing information. He's got a high football IQ, both pre and post snap. You can see that on film. He has good size and physical tools that transfer, I think, to the NFL level. They ran more of a pro-style offense, not necessarily as a whole at Pitt, but they use full field reads. And without getting too much into coach speak, he's able to get through his first, second, third progression, sometimes even into a fourth, by manipulating the pocket and make some full field reads. So I was impressed with that. He did show improvement at all 3 levels in terms of his accuracy. Has the ability to get balls into tight windows. I think the knock on Kenny Pickett is he can get nervous feet in the pocket sometimes. A tendency to move outside of the pocket instead of climbing the pocket. We talk about an A-gap release. Things are breaking down, but he has the ability to step into the pocket and step up and step into his throw. And he tends to work his way to a B, C, or D gap release when he doesn't need to. So that showed up on his film. He struggled with the touch throws a little bit. If you're looking at, trying to throw that post route against a cover 2, he struggled with it or getting into a shot. When he was going against a cover 2 on a fade route, and he's trying to hit that hole shot, he was a little bit more accurate if he put the ball in a zip, but the touch throws over a backer in front of a safety, he struggled with a little bit. And he took on too many sacks. Again, that's getting into the happy feet and trying to make something happen when maybe he should have done a release and gotten out of there. But I just think he has some upside, but I also think that Kenny Pickett, what he did in Pitt and what he did in his final year is impressive. So I won't make a hand size joke. I'm going to leave the hand size jokes out, but I could have gone there, but I'm going to leave it PG rated, and we're going to move on.
Well, we can move on, but let's just talk about his landing spots a little bit, in the sense that a lot of people are looking at Carolina at 6 because of his ties to the coaching staff and such. And my question is that, to me, he's not a guy I would want to take that early. I mean, it reminds me a lot of a North Carolina quarterback being taken that early a few years ago. A Duke quarterback with Daniel Jones and the Giants. And I just think that might be a little bit early. Where do you see him possibly going?
So it's funny. I've got 2 teams highlighted, and one of them is where I don't want to see him go, which you just hit on, which is Carolina. And yes, do I believe in Sam Darnold, that he's the future of Carolina? No, I don't. I think we with DJ Moore, and of course CMC was hurt. I get it. I don't want to get too much into Sam Darnold, but I don't see him as the future of that franchise. But there is familiarity there with Matt Rule and Tepper. And so I think you're going to see, what I don't want to see is a situation that happened in Chicago. Matt Nagy is on the hot seat, so he trades up. He gets a Justin Fields. Matt Nagy was not ready for Justin Fields, right? It's a completely different offense than what you were trying to run, with Andy Dalton at the beginning of the year. I don't want to see that same situation where you have Sam Darnold and then you draft Kenny Pickett and you say, hey, we got to get this guy some playing time, but he can sit because we have Sam Darnold. This team has a lot of holes to fill, and you get into that Matt Nagy syndrome, so to speak, where Matt Rule's like, hey, I'm on the hot seat. I need to make a change. I need to make a big move. I'm going to bring in Kenny Pickett. We're going to see if this is going to work out. And I don't like the landing spot for him. So I have him going to Pittsburgh. I think he can sit behind Mitchell Trubisky. I think there's some similarities from an athletic perspective in what they can do. So the offense doesn't have to change a whole lot from one to the other, like it would with Darnold to Pickett there. But I like Najee Harris, Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, Chase Claypool. The offensive line is terrible, but again, we're talking about Pittsburgh. We're talking about Mike Tomlin, who has never had a losing season in all the years he's been there. It's what I call the Mike Tomlin effect. I think you can go in there and you can win games with a Kenny Pickett. It's a better landing spot for him, I think, than Carolina. So I like to see him, get taken at number 20 versus number 6.
I agree. I think 6 is too early. Let's move on to your number 3. And I always like this kid. And he's a former USC recruit. He's a Southern California kid who I saw play in high school. Why don't you tell us why you have Matt Corral at 3?
Yeah, so he spent his first 3 years at Oak Christian, which you're familiar with, and of course transferred to Long Beach Poly, which anybody who follows California high school football is one of the best programs in the history of the state of California, which is a hotbed for recruits at the national level. So he did. He originally committed to USC, and there were some thoughts he might go to Florida, but eventually turned down Alabama, Georgia, Michigan, and chose to go to Ole Miss, another top 100 overall recruit. I think Matt Corral is a guy that when you watch the film, when you watch him play on Saturdays, God, he was so much fun to watch. Like if there was an Ole Miss game on, I wanted to watch it because I just love the physicality and the way he played the position, the fire and the passion he played the game of football with. And he broke out in 2020, was a Peyton Manning Award finalist after leading the FBS in total offense per game that year. Finished 7th in the Heisman voting. Was second team All SEC. So he's and there's a lot of talk about, is he a rushing quarterback, right? He had over 1,300 yards rushing. He had 11 touchdowns his last year. But he's a guy that if the pocket breaks down can get you some yards. But again, he's not a guy that I'm going to call design run plays for too often. I can do it in the red zone. I can do it in situations, but I'm not really too concerned with designing off.
You know who he reminds me of? Who he reminds me of is a guy that used to play in your backyard. And that would be Jake Plummer. I think he's got a little bit of that wirily, just kind of finds way to get through seams and makes throws. And if you miss him, next thing you know, he's got a 23-yard gain. He's just a guy that makes plays, and he's fiery, man. I'm a fan of him as well.
I mean, look, you look at his last 2 seasons, he's about 70% completion percentage. He threw for almost 3,400 yards both years, 49 touchdowns and 19 interceptions. He takes care of the football. Like I said, he's relentless. He plays with physicality. He does show above average pocket presence, but he has a tendency sometimes to get a little bit happy with his feet as well. And he takes on contact a lot more than he should. That's not going to transfer well in the NFL. He has great ball skills. If you watch the RPO game and what he does there, he's very quick at the mesh point to pull it, make that read, and make a throw on time and hit a receiver in stride. He does have a quick release. He throws a nice catchable ball. And I know a lot of people go, what does that mean? Trust me, there is a difference as a guy that played the receiver position. There are just certain quarterbacks just have a way of putting the ball not only in the right spot, but they're just easy to catch. They fall in your hands and they throw a nice tight spiral you can pick up a little bit further away and to make a catch. So he's got quick hips that creates power. He doesn't take on. He takes a little bit too much risk for me in the pocket trying to extend plays. And there's times where that can cause issues, but he does have a smaller frame. So he's got to be smarter at the NFL level again about taking contact. I think he's scheme specific. I think he needs to be an offense that does run heavy RPO play action concepts. There are questions about his durability to make full field reads, or not durability, but his ability to make full field reads at the NFL level. And he lacks the accuracy when his feet are moving. So for a guy that can use his feet to extend plays, but he gets out the pocket and is off script, he struggles to be accurate in those scenarios. So it'll be interesting. And as far as landing spot goes, I have him going at number 18 in New Orleans. And I know for some people, they're like, hey, we want to see Jameis Winston get an opportunity. And I'm not to say that he won't. I think he will, but it gives him a chance to come in and, again, sit behind somebody for a year, learn what they're doing. I like what the offensive coordinator there is doing. He's a disciple of Sean Payton. He has Kamara. He has Michael Thomas. There's some weapons there offensively. Defense is still good. Offensive line's decent. So I think it's a good spot for him.
I do too. And, I think the recent trade there where they got an extra pick in the first round by trading to 23 and a bunch of other picks. I mean, on paper, I didn't like the deal for them, but if they like a quarterback that much, and I don't think at this point you can consider Jameis Winston a guy that you are going to rely on to be the franchise quarterback. I don't mind Matt Corral at that spot. A lot of people were talking about possibly taking both those picks and moving all the way up to, maybe 6 and getting somebody else, or moving up to 5 so they can jump over Carolina. But I like Matt Corral, and I look forward to seeing what he can do at the next level. Number 2, we've already talked about him earlier. Why don't you tell us why you got Desmond Ridder at 2?
So again, we'll go back to just what we saw on film. So I felt like he showed a lot of confidence and poise, especially when he's under duress. He's not a guy that panics. He's not a guy that rushes things. He takes his time. He's able to allow plays to develop. He has some dual threat ability, but also, he's not a guy that when things break down, it's like, oh, I got to get out and I got to go. I mean, he's a guy that will wait for plays to develop. He'll use that dual threat ability when it's warranted, but he's very good at understanding when it's a good time to do that, and when it's not. I think he's got good spatial awareness in the pocket. He can manipulate, understand when to step up, when to roll out. He's patient, I think, and he shows a high football IQ. And you heard, I can't remember who it was. There was a scout, I can't remember, it was Daniel Jeremiah, that was talking about just the high football IQ and how guys around him rally and look to him for leadership. And when things break down, they know, hey, I have full confidence in the guy leading this team to a win. And you look at the run that Cincinnati made, was impressive. He does have a tendency to run himself into sacks at times, and he doesn't have that elite arm talent, but there's enough arm talent there to make that deep out throw, the deep comeback. I do think he can do it because he throws on time and he can throw in rhythm. And I think we talk about something that's not talked about enough that I hear with quarterbacks is, can he throw on rhythm? And a rhythm is, can I throw in 1.8 to 2.2 or 1.3 to 1.8 seconds on that first read when that back foot drops on a 5-step drop and that ball's out? He's got to throw it on time because that rhythm route needs to be thrown now, and he's very good at doing that. So he does come up short on some deep throws. You saw that time and time again on film, and that allows safety sometimes to get back into a play. So he's got to work on that at the next level. But you can scheme things like that to help work through that. But man, I think what's tough with Desmond Ridder is landing spot. Just everything that you hear, I feel like he'd go anywhere between Seattle. You'll notice I haven't talked about Atlanta, so we'll get to Atlanta. But I think he could go number 9 to Seattle, where right now they have Drew Lock. If they keep DK Metcalf, they already got Noah Fant. They have Chris Carson, Rashad Penny. They have Tyler Lockett. I think it's a good opportunity for Desmond Ridder to come in and have an opportunity to play in year 1. So you may say, hey, maybe he's a guy that needs to sit. Again, him being the guy that I think is the most NFL ready, I could see Seattle at number 9 saying, hey, I know we traded for Drew Lock because we don't know how things are going to play out in the draft. We got to protect ourselves. We don't get our guy. But that's a very intriguing spot to me for Desmond Ridder. He could go to New Orleans. He could go to Pittsburgh. But I would love to see him end up in Seattle.
We're on the same page there. And I do think that, the Russell Wilson effect from however many years ago, I think there's a big push in Seattle for them to go ahead and give it a shot. And they also got an extra first-round pick in that trade.
Yep.
So this allows, yes. So here we go. We're going to go ahead and move on to your number 1. And we've already talked about him a little bit and talk about a guy that is we had Damian Parsons on in the fall, and Damian Parsons from day one said this guy was his number 1 guy, and he just ran and raved about his athletic ability, his ability to throw the ball deep. And we're talking about Malik Willis.
No, and hey, Damian Parsons is one of my guys. He's in that film chat room, and there's a bunch of other people in there too that I think very, very highly of. That it's been fun to exchange what we see on film with these guys. And I could Malik Willis, just everybody's so caught up in the Konami code, and he's the one quarterback. And I'll compare it to this: he's Jalen Hurts with a better arm, right? Or he's Lamar Jackson without the shiftiness. In other words, he's a guy that can one-cut run and take off, but he's not going to shake 3 guys in a phone booth like Lamar Jackson can. But he has that dual threat ability to make big plays. He's a guy that originally committed to Virginia Tech, then decommitted, ended up at Auburn. So you can say the one thing about him that you worry about is he got beat out. I think Jarrett Stidham was the quarterback at the time. 2017, 2018, and then in 2019 they brought in Bo Nix as the transfer, and he was a 5-star recruit, top 100 commit. And I think that's when he realized, Malik was like, hey, this is not going to be the right scenario for me. If I'm going to get to the next level, I'm going to transfer out. Back then, you transferred, you sat out a year. So he had to sit out 2019 and then come to Liberty in 2020, 21. And if you just look at the numbers across the board and what he was able to do, threw for almost, over 5,000 yards, 47 touchdowns, only 18 interceptions. So you saw what he could be, electric with his arms, both in and out of the pocket. And then from a rushing perspective, he ran the ball 360 times for over 2,000 yards and 29 touchdowns. So you're talking about in his 2 years at Liberty, over 5,100 yards passing, 47 touchdowns, 1,800 yards rushing, another 27 touchdowns. He averaged 3.2 touchdowns per game that he accounted for in his 2 years at Liberty. So he's that guy that if he can figure it out, could be the next big thing in the NFL. But I think we have to understand there are some knocks. He's not a surefire guy. I don't have as much confidence in him as I did with other quarterbacks that have come in drafts before him. Because I think there's a lot of him. Like if I had to choose between Malik Willis and Lamar Jackson, I don't even think that's close. It's Lamar Jackson by a landslide. But he has that type of upside, and I think that's what people fall in love with. He's got a great frame, like a Jalen Hurts. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons I like Malik Willis.
Well, if you're going to be picking him, you've got to pick, and you're going to be picking him, and you're just going to have to take a pick real early in drafts. You're doing it because of the ceiling. You're doing it because you may get a guy like a Lamar. You may get somebody who single-handedly can go out and score you 24 points in a PPR league on a Sunday, and he's got that ability. Now it's just a way of figuring out if he can figure it out at the next level. If he can, I think is someone that fantasy managers will love to roster.
Yeah, and I think if we talk about landing spots, again, if he doesn't go at where I would love him to go, and I don't remember if we talked about this before we came on air, if it was while we were on air, so hopefully I'm not being repetitive, but I would love to see him in Detroit. I think it's the best spot for him to land with the pieces they have in place there, with the offensive line they have in place, with Frank Ragnow and Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell. I think it's a great landing spot. He doesn't have to play on day one, but if they feel like it makes sense to do that, certainly wouldn't be surprised if he's your starter week one. But if you talk about other opportunities and places he could land, Carolina at number 6. There are conversations about Seattle, New Orleans using their multiple picks to move up to get him ahead of Carolina at 6 and potentially move into that 5 spot. And this is where I want to touch on Atlanta. So you'll notice I haven't said Atlanta for any of these guys. I believe Atlanta has got so many holes to fill that they can take Marcus Mariota as a to kind of gap between 2022, and 2023, and say, hey, we've got Kyle Pitts, we've got Cordell Patterson. Now he's aging, of course, I get it. We've got hopefully Calvin Ridley maybe coming back in 2023. We've got some pieces here that we like. We're going to go ahead and take a wide receiver as an example, whether that's a Jamison Williams or who that might be at number 8, or you build best player available and you build more pieces there and you hold on and you take a quarterback in 2023 in a much deeper class. So I would not be surprised if Atlanta does not go quarterback. Now, if Malik Willis drops, that's the scenario I see Atlanta go Malik Willis at number 8. If he's not there at number 8, I don't see Atlanta taking a quarterback.
And if they don't, I think that's class. Everyone was shocked last year when you saw Justin Fields drop and you saw some other guys drop it. And if you see people drop it, I think that tells you that this class isn't nearly as good that a lot of people, when you compare it to last year's class. But man, I'll tell you what, next week we're going to hit on running backs. And I know if you are a long-term fantasy player like you and I are, running backs are king in fantasy football. At least they used to always. And this year, I think the number one guy in rookie drafts comes at the running back position. And I'm looking forward to breaking down 5 guys next week and hitting upon, more news and notes and see where we're really at coming up close to the draft.
No, hey, the running backs are going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be a few surprises. I think most people are pretty clear cut on who 1, 2, and 3 are. And you can kind of manipulate the order a little bit. But I think when you get into 4, 5, 6, 7, and even into the top 10, you start to see a lot more shuffling among analysts and sites in the fantasy space. And what you see on Twitter, and I'm always going to be a film guy first, but I trust analytics as well. I think if you can combine the two and really make a strong case, but there'll be maybe a couple surprises in that little dangling the carrot there, but there may be a couple surprises next week when we break down the running back.
Can't wait to do it, Coach. I hope you have a great rest of the week while you're on, your little work sabbatical, or not sabbatical, but travel trip. And so appreciate your time and look forward to doing this again next week.
All right, man. Hey, take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, everyone else, we'll see you next week. Good luck.